The rain fell in heavy sheets across the cobblestone streets of Ravenwood, the kind of deluge that seemed to cleanse the world of its sins only to replace them with deeper, darker ones. Gaslight lamps flickered against the night, their glow captured in puddles that resembled pools of liquid amber. It was in this downpour that Elias Thornfield found himself trudging through the narrow alleys of the old quarter, his weathered leather coat slick with rain, a silver-tipped crossbow clutched firmly in his gloved hands. Elias was not a man who drew attention in daylight. Medium height, lean but strong, with a face that suggested he had once been handsome before life had carved its disappointments into the lines around his eyes. But in darkness, he transformed. His movements became fluid, predatory. His eyes, the color of steel in winter, scanned shadows with an intensity that spoke of years spent hunting things that preferred to remain hidden. Tonight, he was tracking something that had left a trail of drained corpses across 3 districts of the city. The pattern suggested a newly turned vampire, still reckless with bloodlust, unable to control its feeding, dangerous but predictable. Elias had been hunting the undead for 15 years. Ever since one had taken his sister, he knew their habits better than he knew the contours of his own scarred hands. The scream cut through the rainfall like a knife, high-pitched, terrified, unmistakably a child's. Elias pivoted toward the sound, crossbow raised. It had come from an abandoned churchyard just ahead, a place where the city's faithful had once buried their dead before newer, larger cemeteries had been built beyond the city walls. Now it was just another forgotten corner where darkness pooled deep. He moved silently through the rusted iron gates, his boots making no sound on the wet grass. The churchyard was overgrown, ancient tombstones listing like rotted teeth. The small stone church at its center roofless and crumbling. The scream came again, closer now, followed by growls that were decidedly inhuman, not vampires. Elias recognized the sound immediately. Ghouls, corpse-eaters that inhabited graveyards and charnel houses, lesser undead but vicious in packs. And from the sound of it, there was definitely more than one. He rounded the church's broken wall and saw them. 5 ghouls, their grey skin glistening wetly in the rain, yellow eyes gleaming with hunger as they circled something. No, not something. Someone. A small figure pressed against a stone sarcophagus, wielding what appeared to be a broken branch like a sword. A boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old. "Get back!" the child shouted, his voice trembling but defiant. He jabbed the stick at the nearest ghoul, which snapped its elongated jaws in response, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Elias wasted no time. His crossbow sang, sending a bolt through the skull of the nearest ghoul. The creature dropped, its body already beginning to dissolve into foul-smelling ichor. The others turned, their attention diverted from the boy to this new threat. "Close your eyes!" Elias shouted to the child as he pulled a glass vial from his coat. He threw it at the feet of the advancing ghouls, and it shattered, releasing a cloud of silvery powder. Blessed salt mixed with powdered rowan, a hunter's trick. The ghouls shrieked as the mixture burned their corrupted flesh, staggering back. 2 more bolts found their targets before the remaining ghouls could recover. The last one lunged at Elias, faster than its lumbering gait would suggest. He sidestepped, drawing a silver dagger from his belt in one fluid motion, and buried it in the ghoul's throat. The creature gurgled, black fluid spilling from its mouth before it collapsed. Silence fell over the churchyard, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rain and the boy's ragged breathing. Elias turned to the child, who still stood with his back to the sarcophagus, the stick held before him like a talisman. The boy's clothes were expensive, a velvet coat now muddied and torn, fine leather boots, a silk shirt. Not the attire of a street urchin or a commoner's son. This was a child of privilege who had somehow wandered far from where he belonged. "Are you hurt?" Elias asked, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's eye level, careful to keep his distance. Children who had faced the undead were often as frightened of their rescuers as they were of the monsters. The boy lowered his stick slowly. He was pale, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, and eyes that seemed too old for his young face, deep brown, almost black in the dim light. "No," the boy said, his voice steadier now. "I'm not hurt. You killed them all." There was a note of wonder in his voice, but not the hysteria or shock Elias might have expected. "What's your name?" Elias asked, sheathing his dagger but keeping his crossbow ready. Ghouls rarely hunted alone, and there might be more lurking nearby. "Matthias," the boy replied. "Matthias Blackwood." Elias stiffened. Blackwood. A name whispered in hunter circles with a mixture of fear and hatred. Sebastian Blackwood was one of the oldest vampires in Ravenwood, a creature who had walked the earth for centuries. Unlike the feral newborn Elias had been tracking tonight, Blackwood was cunning, powerful, and, most troubling of all, deeply embedded in the city's aristocracy. Few knew his true nature. Those who discovered it rarely lived long enough to share the knowledge, and this boy claimed to be a Blackwood. "Where do you live, Matthias?" Elias asked carefully, studying the child's features more closely. There was nothing overtly inhuman about him, no unnatural pallor beyond what might be attributed to fear, no predatory gleam in his eyes. If he was a vampire's get, he showed no signs of it. "Blackwood Manor," Matthias answered, as if it were obvious. "On Ravencrest Hill." He hesitated, then added with childish pride, "My father owns half the city." Half the city. It wasn't an exaggeration if the boy was indeed Sebastian Blackwood's son. The vampire lord's influence extended through a vast network of businesses, properties and political connections. A power structure built patiently over centuries. "What are you doing out here alone at night?" Elias asked, even as his mind raced with implications. "It's dangerous, especially for a child." A shadow passed over Matthias's face. "I wasn't alone. I was with Mr. Finch, my tutor. We were returning from the Museum of Antiquities when—" He trailed off, his composure faltering for the first time. "Something took him, right off the street. It moved so fast and it was so dark. I ran, and then I got lost, and then those things found me." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain, the vampire he'd been hunting. It must have taken the tutor. And now the son of Sebastian Blackwood stood before him, lost and vulnerable. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated. If he returned the boy to Blackwood Manor, he would be walking directly into a vampire's lair. But if he didn't, and harm came to Sebastian Blackwood's son, the vampire lord's retribution would be terrible to behold. "I want to go home," Matthias said, a hint of command in his voice despite his bedraggled appearance. "My father will reward you handsomely for bringing me back safely." "I bet he will," Elias thought grimly. "The question is whether I'll leave Blackwood Manor alive." "All right," he said aloud, "I'll take you home, but stay close to me. The streets aren't safe tonight." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Matthias took it. The boy's fingers were cold but strong, gripping Elias's hand with surprising firmness. They left the churchyard together, Elias constantly scanning their surroundings as they made their way through the rain-slicked streets. The journey to Ravencrest Hill would take them across the city, from the decrepit old quarter through the merchant districts, and finally to the elegant mansions where Ravenwood's elite dwelled. As they walked, Elias noticed that Matthias showed none of the exhaustion a normal child might exhibit after such an ordeal. He kept pace easily, his eyes alert, taking in everything around them with curious intensity. "You're a hunter, aren't you?" Matthias asked suddenly as they passed through a deserted marketplace. "Like in the stories." Elias glanced down at him. "What stories?" "The ones about people who fight monsters," Matthias replied. "Mr. Finch says they're just tales to frighten children, but I always thought they must be real. Monsters are real, so hunters must be too." There was something unsettling about the boy's logic, so straightforward, yet coming from such young lips. Yes, Elias admitted. I'm a hunter. Have you killed many vampires? The question caught Elias off guard. He studied the boy's face, searching for any sign that this was more than innocent curiosity, but Matthias merely looked up at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Some, Elias answered carefully. Why do you ask? Matthias shrugged. I've never met one. A vampire, I mean. Or a hunter. Until tonight. Elias felt a strange tightening in his chest. Either the boy was an exceptional actor, or he truly didn't know about his father's nature. The latter seemed impossible. How could a child grow up in a vampire's household without realizing the truth? Unless Sebastian Blackwood had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal his true nature, even from his own son. They were approaching the edge of the merchant district when Elias sensed they were being followed. A prickling at the nape of his neck, a hunter's instinct honed by years of surviving encounters that would have killed lesser men. Matthias, he said quietly, do you know any shortcuts to your home from here? The boy nodded. Through the gardens of St. Alaric's, they connect to the private pathways that lead up to the hill estates. Good. We're going to walk a little faster now. They increased their pace, turning down a side street that would lead them to the gardens Matthias had mentioned. The rain had finally begun to slacken, but the night seemed to have grown darker, the shadows between buildings deeper and more impenetrable. They were halfway down the street when a figure stepped out from one such shadow directly into their path. Tall and unnaturally thin, clothed in what had once been fine garments, now stained with blood and dirt. Its face was gaunt, with skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and eyes that glowed with a feverish crimson light. The vampire Elias had been hunting. Well, it said, its voice a dry rasp, what fortune! I was merely seeking another meal to quench this incessant thirst. And here before me is the very hunter who has been pursuing me. Its gaze shifted to Matthias. And with such tender young prey in tow, Elias pushed Matthias behind him, raising his crossbow in one swift motion. Run when I tell you, he whispered to the boy. Straight to the gardens. Don't look back. The vampire's lips curled into a smile, revealing fangs stained with fresh blood. That would be Mr. Finch's blood, it said, as if reading Elias's thoughts. A scholarly vintage, though rather thin. The child will be sweeter, I think. Full of innocence and fear. The only thing you'll taste is silver, Elias growled. He squeezed the crossbow's trigger, sending a bolt flying toward the vampire's heart. With inhuman speed, the creature sidestepped, the bolt grazing its shoulder instead of finding its mark. It hissed in pain as the blessed silver burned its flesh, but the wound wasn't fatal. Run! Elias shouted to Matthias, already reloading his crossbow with practiced efficiency. The vampire lunged, moving with the unnatural quickness of the newly turned, desperate with hunger. Elias met it with a swift kick to the chest, momentarily staggering it, then fired again. This time the bolt struck the creature's thigh, eliciting a shriek of rage and pain. Elias expected to hear the sound of Matthias's retreating footsteps, but instead the boy's voice came from just behind him. "It's not alone!" Matthias warned, his voice tight with fear. Elias spun around to see two more vampires emerging from the shadows at the other end of the street. These weren't newly turned fledglings, but older, more controlled undead, their movements fluid and purposeful rather than frenzied. They were trapped. As the wounded vampire recovered and its companions advanced, Elias made a split-second decision. He scooped Matthias up with one arm and with all his strength leaped for the cast-iron balcony of a building to their right. His fingers caught the ornate railing and he hauled them both up and over, ignoring the pain as the iron bit into his palm. They landed on the balcony as the vampires below snarled in frustration. But Elias knew their respite would be brief. Vampires could scale buildings as easily as men climbed stairs. "In here," he said, breaking the glass of the balcony door with his crossbow stock. They slipped inside what appeared to be an abandoned apartment, dust covers shrouding the furniture like pale ghosts in the darkness. "We need to keep moving," Elias said, already heading for the apartment's door. "Those things can track us by scent." "Why are there so many?" Matthias asked, keeping pace with him as they hurried down a dim hallway. "Is it because of me?" The question gave Elias pause. Was it possible? Were these vampires hunting Sebastian Blackwood's son specifically? It seemed too coincidental otherwise, 3 vampires converging on them just as he was escorting the boy home. "I don't know," he answered truthfully. "But I'm going to get you home safely. I promise." As they reached the building's main staircase, a crash echoed from the apartment they'd just left. The vampires had broken in. "This way," Elias said, gripping Matthias's hand tightly as they raced down the stairs. They burst out into an alley behind the building and ran toward the end, where Elias could see the high stone wall that surrounded St. Alaric's gardens. They were halfway there when a dark figure dropped from above, landing directly in their path with predatory grace. It was one of the older vampires, a female with long silver hair and eyes like frozen amber. She wore an elegant gown of midnight blue that seemed untouched by the night's rain. "The boy comes with me," she said, her voice musical yet cold. "The master requests his presence." "What master?" Elias demanded, pushing Matthias behind him once more. The vampire smiled, revealing delicate fangs. "Why? The one who has been searching for this child for a very long time. The one who will reward me handsomely for bringing him the son of Sebastian Blackwood." A chill ran through Elias. Not Blackwood himself, then, but another vampire, one powerful enough to command others of its kind, one with a particular interest in Matthias. "Tell your master he'll have to find another messenger," Elias said, raising his crossbow. "This one won't be returning." The vampire's smile widened. "Oh, Hunter, you have no idea what forces you're interfering with. This isn't about your petty crusade against our kind. This is about power that has slumbered for centuries, about bloodlines and prophecies older than this city itself." Behind them, Elias could hear the other vampires approaching. Time was running out. Matthias suddenly stepped forward, his small face set in an expression of determination that seemed jarringly adult. "My father will destroy you all," he said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "He'll turn your master to ash." The vampire laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Your father, child. Your father has been keeping secrets from you, secrets about what you truly are, about what flows in your veins." Her amber eyes gleamed with malice. "Why don't you ask your hunter friend here what Sebastian Blackwood really is?" Matthias turned to Elias, confusion and the first real fear Elias had seen in him flooding his eyes. "What is she talking about? What's wrong with my father?" Before Elias could answer, the night split with a sound like thunder, and a blinding light flooded the alley. The female vampire shrieked, raising her arms to shield her face as her skin began to smoke and blister. In the chaos, Elias seized his chance. He fired his crossbow point-blank into the distracted vampire's chest. She staggered back, clutching at the bolt, her shriek cutting off as her body began to crumble inward, flesh turning to ash that scattered in the sudden wind that had risen. "Come on!" Elias shouted to Matthias over the howling gale that now filled the alley. He couldn't explain the sudden light or wind, but he wasn't going to question their good fortune. Together, they ran for the garden wall. Elias boosted Matthias up and over, then followed, just as the remaining vampires recovered from whatever supernatural phenomenon had saved them. As they dropped down into the lush darkness of St. Alaric's gardens, Matthias looked up at Elias, his face pale in the moonlight that now broke through the clearing clouds. "What did she mean?" he asked, his voice small but insistent. "About my father keeping secrets? About what I am." Elias looked down at the boy, this child who had faced ghouls and vampires with uncanny composure, who spoke of monsters as if they were simply facts of life, who claimed as his father one of the most dangerous vampires in Ravenwood. "Matthias," he began, uncertain how to continue, "there are things about your father that—" He was interrupted by a distant sound, bells tolling midnight from the cathedral across the city. And with each sonorous ring, the garden around them seemed to shift, shadows deepening, the very air becoming charged with unseen energy. "He's coming," Matthias whispered, his eyes widening. "My father. He always knows when I'm in danger." As the final bell tolled, a mist began to form at the center of the garden, coalescing into a tall, imposing figure cloaked in darkness. A man, or something that had once been a man, with aristocratic features carved from marble and eyes that burned like ancient stars. Sebastian Blackwood had arrived to claim his son. And Elias Thornfield, vampire hunter, suddenly realized he was standing between an immortal predator and his child. Part 2. Sebastian Blackwood's presence transformed the garden. Flowers closed their petals as if night had suddenly deepened. The air grew still, charged with ancient power that made Elias's skin prickle. Even the rain seemed to hesitate, suspended in a moment between falling and stillness. "Father!" Matthias's voice cut through the silence, relief evident in his tone. The boy took a step forward, but Elias caught his shoulder instinctively. Sebastian Blackwood's gaze shifted to Elias's hand on his son's shoulder, and his eyes narrowed. When he spoke, his voice was cultured, measured, betraying nothing of the predator that lurked beneath. "You've touched what is mine, hunter." The words carried no overt threat, yet they fell like a death sentence in the hushed garden. "The boy was being hunted," Elias replied, his hand still on Matthias's shoulder, though every survival instinct screamed at him to run. "By vampires serving someone they called master, someone who isn't you." Something flickered across Blackwood's marble features, a shadow of concern, quickly masked. "Matthias," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Come here." The boy hesitated, glancing up at Elias. In that brief moment of indecision, Elias saw confusion in Matthias's eyes, the first seeds of doubt about his father taking root. "He saved me, father," Matthias said, "from ghouls in the churchyard, and then from vampires. He was bringing me home." Sebastian's expression softened marginally as he looked at his son. "And for that service, he has my gratitude." His eyes met Elias's again, cold and assessing. "A debt I shall repay with your life, hunter. Leave now, while I permit it." "The vampires that attacked us," Elias pressed, knowing he was risking his life but unable to walk away from the mystery before him. They weren't newly turned. They were organized, purposeful. They wanted Matthias specifically. "Your concern is noted," Sebastian said dismissively. "Matthias, we're leaving." But the boy remained rooted in place. "Father," he said, his voice suddenly smaller, more childlike than it had been all night. "What did they mean? About secrets, about what I am?" The garden grew colder still. Sebastian's face was unreadable, a perfect mask that gave nothing away. "What exactly did these vampires say to you?" Before Matthias could answer, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble echoed through the garden, and the mist that had heralded Sebastian's arrival began to thicken, swirling around them in unnatural patterns. "They've found us," Sebastian hissed, genuine alarm breaking through his composed facade. He moved with blinding speed to Matthias's side, pulling the boy away from Elias with such force that the hunter stumbled back. "We need to leave. Now." "What's happening?" Elias demanded, regaining his balance and readying his crossbow. "Something that does not concern you," Sebastian snapped. He swept Matthias into his arms, but before he could vanish into the mist, a circle of pale blue flames erupted around them, trapping father and son within a ring of supernatural fire. From the shadows beyond the garden wall emerged 3 figures. They moved with the fluid grace of vampires, but there was something different about them, an aura of power that made even Sebastian Blackwood tense with caution. The leader stepped forward, a tall man with skin the color of aged parchment and eyes like pools of liquid obsidian. He wore a coat of crimson velvet that seemed to absorb the light around it, and at his throat gleamed an amulet of dark metal inscribed with symbols Elias didn't recognize. "Sebastian Blackwood," the newcomer said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. The prodigal son, attempting to flee once more with his ill-gotten prize. Sebastian placed Matthias down behind him, his posture shifting to one of protection. "Lord Voss," he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral despite the tension in his stance. "You're far from your territories." The vampire lord smiled, revealing teeth filed to points like a shark's. "The conclave has dissolved our territorial boundaries, Sebastian. Did you not receive the summons?" His smile widened. "Oh, but you've been in exile for so long. Self-imposed isolation to hide your experiment." His gaze shifted to Matthias, who stared back with wide, frightened eyes. "Hello, young one, do you know who I am?" "Don't speak to him," Sebastian growled, a hint of inhuman resonance entering his voice. Lord Voss ignored him. "I am Heinrich Voss, child. I knew your father when Rome was young, and I've watched his obsession with human bloodlines grow from peculiar hobby to dangerous heresy." His eyes gleamed. "You are the culmination of centuries of his work. The perfect vessel." "Enough!" Sebastian snarled. The air around him seemed to darken as he drew on powers Elias had never witnessed in a vampire before. The ring of flames flickered, but held. Elias stood frozen, caught in a conflict between beings whose power dwarfed his own. But as he watched Matthias's face, the confusion, the fear, he found his voice. "What is he talking about?" Elias asked, addressing Sebastian directly. "What is Matthias to you?" Voss laughed, the sound like brittle bones breaking. "Oh, this is delightful. The hunter doesn't know. Tell him, Sebastian. Tell him what you've done. Tell your son what he truly is." Matthias looked up at his father, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. "Father!" For the first time, Sebastian Blackwood appeared at a loss. His gaze moved from Matthias to Elias, then to the vampire lords surrounding them. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost regretful. "Matthias is my son," he said simply. "My true son, not adopted, not stolen as so many of our kind acquire children. He was born of my seed, carried by a human woman of a bloodline I had tracked for generations." Elias felt his blood run cold. "That's impossible. Vampires can't reproduce." "Most cannot," Sebastian acknowledged, "but I am not most vampires, Hunter. I was ancient when the first stones of Ravenwood were laid. I have spent centuries studying the limits of our kind, pushing against the boundaries of what we are." "He tampered with forces beyond his understanding," Voss interjected, circling the ring of flames like a predator. "Blood magic, forbidden rituals, all to create a half-breed child who could walk in daylight but possess our strength, our longevity. A Dhampir." Elias breathed, the pieces falling into place. Dhampirs were thought to be legends, even among hunters, half-vampire offspring with unique abilities, neither fully undead nor truly human. "Yes," Sebastian said, his hand resting protectively on Matthias's shoulder. "Though that crude term hardly encompasses what my son is, what he will become." "What does that mean?" Matthias asked, his voice trembling. "Father, am I a monster?" The pain that crossed Sebastian's face was so human, so raw, that for a moment Elias almost forgot what he was. "No, Matthias, you are neither monster nor mere human. You are the bridge between worlds, born of both darkness and light." "How poetic," Voss sneered, "but incomplete. Tell the boy the prophecy, Sebastian. Tell him why the conclave hunts him. Tell him about the Book of Ascension." At the mention of the book, Sebastian moved with supernatural speed, lunging at the barrier of flames as if to break through by force. The fire flared higher, and he recoiled, the edges of his coat smoldering. "The flames are blessed by blood older than yours," Voss said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "You've grown soft in your isolation, living among cattle, playing at being human." "What's the Book of Ascension?" Elias demanded, stepping closer to the circle. Despite everything, he couldn't abandon the child. Dhampir or not, Matthias was caught in a struggle he couldn't possibly understand. A text written in the early days of our kind, Voss answered, seemingly pleased to have a new audience. It speaks of a being born of both worlds, who would possess the power to transform vampire kind, to free us from our weaknesses, the burn of sunlight, the thirst for blood, his obsidian eyes fixed on Matthias, or to destroy us utterly. It's a myth, Sebastian hissed, a corruption of ancient wisdom by those too afraid to evolve. Is it? Voss challenged. Then why hide the boy? Why raise him in ignorance of his nature? Why not present your miraculous offspring to the conclave and share your discovery? Because the conclave would do exactly what you're attempting now, Sebastian retorted. Take him, use him, sacrifice him in your barbaric rituals to gain power for yourselves. Matthias had gone very still, absorbing every word with the unnatural focus Elias had noticed earlier. Is that why I've never been allowed to leave the manor without guards? He asked quietly. Why I've never been permitted to have friends? Why Mr. Finch was teaching me about blood magic in secret? Sebastian turned to his son, genuine regret in his eyes. I was protecting you, preparing you. When you came of age, you would have told me that I'm half vampire. Matthias's voice rose, childish anger breaking through his composure. That my father drinks blood? That everything I thought I knew was a lie? Not everything, Sebastian said softly. I am your father. I've always loved you. That has never been a lie. The naked emotion in the vampire's voice stunned Elias. In 15 years of hunting the undead, he had never witnessed such human feeling from one of their kind. It challenged everything he thought he knew. Voss, however, seemed unmoved. How touching. The monster loves his little creation. He made a sharp gesture, and the circle of flames began to contract, forcing Sebastian and Matthias closer together. But sentiment won't save either of you. The conclave has decreed that the Dhampir must be brought before them. The prophecy will be fulfilled under our guidance. Sebastian's face hardened. He drew himself up to his full height, and the air around him seemed to darken, shadows gathering like a cloak. You've forgotten who I am, Heinrich. What I was before I withdrew from your petty politics. Power emanated from him in waves, ancient terrible power that made Elias's hunter amulets burn cold against his skin. The grass beneath Sebastian's feet withered and died in an expanding circle. I was old when you were still human, Sebastian continued, his voice deepening to an inhuman register that vibrated in Elias's bones. I drank from the veins of kings while you scavenged in graveyards. I walked with the first of our kind, learned their secrets, mastered arts you cannot comprehend. The shadows around him solidified, becoming tangible tendrils of darkness that pushed against the ring of fire. Voss took a step back, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. Father, Matthias whispered, tugging at Sebastian's coat. Father, you're scaring me. The words seemed to pierce Sebastian's gathering rage. He glanced down at his son, and for a moment the darkness receded, the terrible pressure of his power easing. That moment of distraction was all Voss needed. He barked a command in a language Elias didn't recognize, and his two companions raised their hands in unison. The blue flames surged inward with explosive force. Elias acted on instinct. He vaulted over the contracting ring of fire, landing beside Matthias. In one fluid motion, he scooped the boy up and rolled back through the flames, his coat smoking but protecting them both from the worst of the burn. "Hunter!" Sebastian roared, but it was too late. The flames closed around him completely, forming a pillar of blue fire that reached toward the night sky. Voss turned his shark-like smile on Elias, who now stood with Matthias clutched protectively against him. How unexpected! The hunter saves the half-breed. He took a step forward. Give me the boy, human, and perhaps I'll allow you a quick death. You'll have to take him, Elias growled, setting Matthias down behind him and raising his crossbow. Voss laughed. Brave but foolish. Do you think your pathetic weapons can harm me? I was ancient when your hunter orders were founded. Maybe not, Elias acknowledged, but silver still burns no matter how old the vampire. He fired, the bolt streaking toward Voss's heart. The vampire lord caught the bolt inches from his chest, his movement too fast for human eyes to track. He examined it with casual interest, then snapped it between his fingers. Craftsmanship has improved since I last faced a hunter, he remarked, but the outcome remains unchanged. He gestured to his companions, who began to advance on either side, flanking Elias and Matthias. Elias reached for his last vial of blessed salt, knowing it would only buy them seconds at best. The pillar of blue flame behind them suddenly imploded with a thunderous crack. Where it had stood was Sebastian Blackwood, or what remained of him. His elegant clothes were burned away, his skin blackened and cracked, revealing glowing embers beneath like the heart of a dying star. He looked barely recognizable as the aristocratic figure of moments before, more demon than vampire. "You forget," he rasped, his voice like stone grinding on stone. "Fire purifies. And I have walked through holier flames than yours, Heinrich." Voss's expression shifted from triumph to alarm. "Impossible! Those flames were blessed by the blood of 7 elders, and I have drunk from the source of their power." Sebastian raised a charred hand, and a wave of force exploded outward, sending Voss and his companions flying backward. He staggered toward Elias and Matthias, his body already beginning to heal, pale skin reforming over the burning embers beneath. "Take my son," he commanded Elias, his voice still unnaturally deep. "There is a sanctuary beneath the city, unknown to the conclave. The entrance lies beneath the old clock tower in Raven Square." "Why would I help you?" Elias demanded, though he kept his body positioned protectively in front of Matthias. "Because the boy is innocent," Sebastian replied, his features gradually resolving back into their human semblance. "And because if the conclave takes him, they will unleash something none of us, human or vampire, can control." A roar of fury announced Voss's recovery. The vampire lord rose into the air, suspended by a whirlwind of unnatural power, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Go!" Sebastian urged, turning to face his enemy. "I will hold them as long as I can." Elias hesitated, every instinct as a hunter warring with the protective impulse he felt toward Matthias. The boy solved his dilemma by grabbing his hand. "Please," Matthias said, his eyes wide and afraid yet determined. "I don't want to go with them." That decided it. Elias nodded sharply, then turned and ran, pulling Matthias alongside him. Behind them, the night erupted with the sounds of supernatural combat, the clash of ancient powers unleashed without restraint. They fled through the gardens, following winding paths that Matthias navigated with surprising confidence despite the darkness. "This way," the boy directed, leading them toward a small postern gate half hidden by climbing roses. "This leads to the lower city." As they emerged onto a narrow street beyond the garden wall, Elias glanced back. The sky above St. Alaric's gardens was torn by flashes of unnatural lightning, and the ground beneath their feet trembled intermittently. "Will he survive?" Matthias asked quietly, following Elias's gaze. "I don't know," Elias answered honestly. He studied the boy's face in the brief illumination provided by the distant supernatural battle. "How much did you know about what you are?" Matthias looked away. "I knew I was different. I'm stronger than other children my age, faster. I can see in the dark, and sometimes—" He hesitated. "Sometimes I can feel people's emotions, like their colors in the air." "But you didn't know about your father?" The boy shook his head. "I knew he was different too. He never ate with me. He was only awake at night, but I thought perhaps he was ill in some way." His voice broke slightly. "I didn't think he was a monster." "And now?" Matthias was silent for a long moment. "I don't know what to think anymore, but he's still my father." He looked up at Elias, his dark eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And he told you to take me to the clock tower, to keep me safe." Elias weighed his options rapidly. The clock tower was in the heart of the city, a good distance away. Between them and it lay streets that might still harbour vampires. Both those hunting Matthias and the fledgling Elias had originally been tracking. But the alternative was to take the boy to Hunter headquarters, where Matthias would undoubtedly be treated as a monster himself. Elias had seen how his brethren dealt with creatures they deemed unnatural, regardless of innocence or age. "All right," he decided, "we'll go to the clock tower. But stay close and do exactly as I say." They set off through the rain-slick streets, keeping to shadows and alleyways, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. Matthias moved with uncanny silence for a child, his steps as light and sure as Elias's own. As they passed a darkened shopfront, Elias caught their reflection in the glass, a grim-faced hunter and a small, solemn boy who looked far too human to be what Voss had called him. A bridge between worlds. A fulfillment of prophecy, the potential savior or destroyer of vampire kind. Elias wondered what that made him, the hunter who now protected a vampire's son against other vampires. The lines he had lived by for 15 years, the certainties that had guided his crusade, were blurring with every step. Behind them, the supernatural storm above St. Alaric's gardens suddenly ceased, plunging the night into an eerie silence that raised the hair on Elias's neck. The battle was over. But who had emerged victorious, and what that meant for them, remained to be seen. The clock tower of Raven Square loomed above them, its ancient face glowing with a sickly yellow light that barely penetrated the fog now rolling through the streets. Elias paused at the edge of the square, scanning for movement. The normally bustling plaza was deserted, the surrounding shops and cafes shuttered against the night. "Something's wrong," he murmured, tightening his grip on Matthias's hand. "It's too quiet." Matthias tilted his head slightly, as if listening to sounds beyond human perception. "There are people nearby," he whispered. "Hiding, watching. I can feel their fear." Elias glanced down at the boy, a chill running through him at this casual display of supernatural awareness. "Can you tell who they're afraid of? Us or something else?" "Both," Matthias answered, his dark eyes troubled. "They don't know what I am, but they sense it. And there's something else." He trailed off, looking toward the narrow street that led behind the clock tower. "Something cold. Waiting." The hunter weighed their options. Crossing the exposed square would make them vulnerable, but hesitation could be equally dangerous if Voss and his companions had indeed defeated Sebastian and were now in pursuit. "We'll go around," Elias decided, leading Matthias along the perimeter of the square, keeping to the deepest shadows. The clock tower grew larger as they approached, its stonework worn by centuries of rain and pollution, gargoyles peering down from its corners with expressions of eternal malice. They had nearly reached the arched doorway at its base when Matthias suddenly froze. "Stop!" he hissed, his face paling. "It's here!" Before Elias could respond, the shadows to their left detached themselves from the wall, coalescing into a figure that stepped into their path. Not Voss or one of his vampire lords, but something far more ancient. Its body was wrapped in tattered grave clothes, the fabric so old it crumbled at the edges. Beneath the wrappings, its flesh was desiccated, stretched taut over a frame that was almost skeletal. Its eyes, however, burned with intelligence and hunger, two crimson points in the darkness of its hood. "A revenant," Elias breathed, instinctively pushing Matthias behind him. Revenants were among the oldest and most dangerous undead, vampires who had survived for millennia, transcending the limitations of their kind through forbidden magic and unthinkable sacrifices. "The half-blood child," the Revenant said, its voice a dry whisper that somehow carried despite its softness. "So it's true. Blackwood succeeded where all others failed." Elias raised his crossbow, though he knew the weapon would do little more than slow such a creature. "Step aside. We want no quarrel with you." The Revenant's mouth stretched in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth filed to needle points. "But I want quarrel with you, Hunter, or rather, with what you protect." It took a gliding step closer. The conclave offers much for the boy's capture, but my interest is personal. What interest could you have in a child? Elias demanded, trying to keep the creature talking while he assessed their chances of reaching the clock tower door. Not in the child, the revenant corrected. In what the child represents, possibility, evolution. Its burning gaze fixed on Matthias. I am Lazarus, little Dampier. I walked the earth when your father was still a mewling human infant. I have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of gods, and in all those centuries I have never seen one like you. Matthias, to Elias's surprise, stepped out from behind him to face the ancient vampire directly. My father will come for me, he said, his voice steadier than any child's had a right to be in such circumstances. Lazarus tilted his head, studying the boy. Your father is dust, child. Voss and his cohort tore him apart when his strength failed. I watched from the shadows, waiting for my moment. Elias felt Matthias stiffen beside him, but the boy's face remained composed. You're lying, he said softly. I would know if he were gone. I would feel it. Something like respect flickered in the revenant's burning eyes. Fascinating. The bond between you is stronger than I anticipated. He reached out a withered hand. Come with me willingly, and I will spare the hunter. Resist, and I will feed on his heart before your eyes. Elias saw Matthias begin to step forward and grabbed his shoulder. No, he said firmly. We're going into the clock tower as your father instructed. Lazarus hissed, the sound like steam escaping a pressurized valve. The sanctuary! You think Blackwood's pitiful wards will keep me out? I taught him those magics when Rome was young. With inhuman speed, the revenant lunged for Matthias. Elias shoved the boy toward the clock tower door and threw himself into the creature's path, firing his crossbow point blank. The bolt struck Lazarus in the chest, momentarily staggering him. Run! Elias shouted to Matthias, drawing his silver dagger as the revenant recovered, plucking the bolt from his body as if it were a minor irritation. Matthias raced for the clock tower door, his small hands pushing against the ancient wood. It didn't budge. It's locked, he cried. Lazarus laughed, the sound like bones rattling in a box. Did you think it would be so easy? The sanctuary can only be opened by blood. Blackwood's blood, or the blood of his line. Elias backed toward Matthias, keeping himself between the boy and the advancing revenant. Your blood, he said quietly to the child. It needs your blood to open. Matthias's eyes widened in understanding. He looked at his hand, then at the door, where Elias now saw a small, weathered copper plate set into the wood at about the height of a man's heart. An insignia was etched into its surface, a raven with outstretched wings, clutching a drop of blood in its beak. I've never... The boy hesitated. I don't like blood. Lazarus was upon them now, moving with the fluid grace of his kind. He batted Elias aside with contemptuous ease, sending the hunter crashing into the wall of the clock tower with bone-jarring force. Elias felt something crack in his ribcage, pain lancing through his chest as he struggled to rise. A Dampier who fears blood, Lazarus mused, now standing over Matthias. How delightfully ironic, but you'll learn to love it, child. I'll teach you the ecstasy of the hunt, the rapture of the kill. His withered hand closed around Matthias's throat, lifting the boy effortlessly. Matthias kicked and struggled, his face contorting with effort. Stop fighting, Lazarus commanded, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. Submit to what you are, what you were born to be. Matthias went still, but not from compliance. His eyes, fixed on the revenant's face, began to change, the dark brown irises bleeding to crimson, then lightening to a molten gold that seemed to glow from within. I am not yours to command, Matthias said, his voice deepening in a way that echoed his father's supernatural register. I am not yours to teach. A pulse of energy emanated from the boy's small form, throwing Lazarus back several paces. The revenant's face registered shock, then calculation, then a terrible hunger. Yes, he whispered. The power of both worlds, untrained, unrefined, but magnificent. He extended his hand again, not to grab, but to beckon. Come to me willingly, child. I can show you how to master these gifts, how to become what you were always meant to be." Elias, fighting through his pain, had regained his footing. He saw Matthias's hesitation, the confusion in those unnaturally golden eyes, and understood the danger. The boy was discovering his nature in the most violent way possible, with no guidance except the corrupting influence of an ancient monster. "Matthias!" Elias called, his voice rough with pain. "Your father wanted you safe. He died to give you that chance." He nodded toward the copper plate on the door. "Use your blood. Open the sanctuary." Matthias looked from Elias to Lazarus, then back again. Something in the hunter's eyes must have reached him, because he turned abruptly to the clock tower door. Before Lazarus could react, the boy bit into his own palm hard enough to draw blood, then pressed his bleeding hand against the copper raven. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The insignia glowed with sudden golden light, and veins of the same radiance spread outward through the stonework of the tower, tracing arcane patterns that had been invisible moments before. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a spiraling staircase that descended into darkness. "Go!" Elias shouted, lunging at Lazarus with his silver dagger to buy Matthias time. The revenant caught his wrist, crushing it with effortless strength until Elias dropped the weapon with a cry of pain. "Fool," Lazarus hissed, "you could have walked away. Now you'll die for nothing." Elias smiled through gritted teeth. "Not for nothing, for him." With his free hand he pulled his last vial of blessed salt from his coat and smashed it against the revenant's chest. The substance ignited on contact with the undead flesh, erupting in white-hot flames that enveloped the ancient vampire. Lazarus shrieked, a sound that shattered windows in the surrounding buildings. He released Elias to claw at the burning fabric of his grave clothes. Elias stumbled back, cradling his broken wrist, and retreated toward the open door where Matthias waited, his golden eyes wide with shock and fear. Together they plunged into the sanctuary, the door swinging shut behind them with a sound of finality. The light from the activated wards provided just enough illumination to see the stone steps spiraling downward. "He'll follow," Matthias said, his voice trembling slightly as it returned to its childish register. His eyes, too, were fading back to their normal dark brown. "The fire won't stop him for long. Your father said this place was safe," Elias replied, though doubt gnawed at him. If Lazarus had taught Sebastian those very wards, as he claimed, would they truly keep the revenant out? They descended the stairs, which seemed to go deeper than should have been possible beneath the clock tower. The air grew cooler, with an earthy dampness that suggested they had passed below the city's groundwater level. Finally, the stairs opened into a circular chamber hewn from solid bedrock. The sanctuary was austere but not unwelcoming. A few pieces of simple furniture, a table, chairs, a narrow bed, occupied one side of the space. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes bound in materials Elias didn't want to identify. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, supporting a large crystal sphere that glowed with the same golden light as the wards. "I've never been here before," Matthias said, gazing around in wonder. "I didn't know this place existed." Elias moved to examine the bookshelves, wincing as the movement jarred his broken ribs and wrist. "Your father must have prepared it as a refuge, a safe place for you if you were ever discovered." "But not for himself," Matthias noted, his perceptiveness unsettling in one so young. "There's only one bed." Elias paused, struck by the implication. He knew he might not survive. A heavy thud from above interrupted their conversation, the unmistakable sound of something powerful striking the clock tower door. Dust sifted down from the ceiling of the sanctuary. "He's trying to break in," Matthias whispered, moving closer to Elias. Another impact shook the chamber, stronger than the first. The crystal sphere at its center flickered momentarily, then steadied. "The wards are holding," Elias observed, though he wondered for how long. He approached the pedestal, studying the sphere. Within its depths, images moved like reflections in troubled water, glimpses of the city above, of the clock tower door where Lazarus now raged, of other places Elias didn't recognize. "It's a scrying crystal," Matthias said, coming to stand beside him. "Father has had one in his study. He forbade me to touch it." A third impact rattled the sanctuary, and this time a crack appeared in the crystal's surface. The images within grew distorted, fragmenting across the spreading fracture. "We need to find another way out," Elias said urgently, scanning the chamber for hidden passages. "If that revenant breaks through, he'll take me to the conclave," Matthias finished, "or keep me for himself." He looked up at Elias, fear evident in his young face, despite his attempts at bravery. "I don't want to be a weapon or an experiment. I just want to be—" He trailed off. "Normal?" Elias suggested gently. Matthias shook his head. "I know I'll never be normal, but I want to be me, not what they want me to be." The crystal cracked further as another blow struck the sanctuary door. The golden light flickered, dimmed, and then stabilized at a lower intensity. The wards were failing. Elias knelt before Matthias, ignoring the pain from his injuries. "Listen to me. No matter what happens when that door breaks, you are not defined by what they say you are. Not by Voss, not by Lazarus, not even by your father. You choose what you become." He gripped the boy's shoulders. "Do you understand?" Matthias nodded solemnly. "Like you chose to help me, even though I'm—" He hesitated. "Even though my father was a vampire." "Exactly." Elias managed a smile. "We make our own paths." The crystal sphere suddenly shattered with a musical chime, fragments scattering across the stone floor. The golden light vanished, plunging the sanctuary into darkness, broken only by a faint glow still emanating from the stairwell, the last remnants of the failing wards. In the near darkness, Elias felt Matthias's hand find his. "I'm scared," the boy admitted, his voice small. "So am I," Elias confessed. "But we'll face it together." He squeezed the small hand, marveling at the strange twist of fate that had made him protector to a vampire's son. "Now, quickly, help me search the walls. There must be another exit." They separated, moving around the perimeter of the chamber, running their hands over the smooth stone, in search of seams or mechanisms that might reveal a hidden passage. The impacts from above grew more frequent, more violent. Dust and small pieces of stone now rained down with each blow. "Here!" Matthias called suddenly from the far side of the chamber. "I found something!" Elias hurried over, guided by the boy's voice in the dimness. Matthias stood before what appeared to be a blank section of wall, but as Elias drew closer, he saw that the boy's hand was pressed against a subtle indentation in the stone, another raven symbol, barely visible in the fading light. "It needs blood again, doesn't it?" Matthias asked, resignation in his voice. Before Elias could answer, a tremendous crash echoed from above, followed by the sound of stone cracking. A terrible presence filled the stairwell, ancient, malevolent, triumphant. "Too late," came Lazarus's dry whisper, amplified by the stone chamber. "The sanctuary is breached. The boy is mine." The revenant appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his grave clothes still smouldering in places from the blessed salt, his crimson eyes blazing in the darkness. He moved into the chamber with predatory grace, his gaze fixed on Matthias. "I've been patient," Lazarus said, his voice almost gentle, "but my patience is at an end. Come to me, child of two worlds, or watch your hunter die slowly." Elias stepped in front of Matthias, though he knew it was a futile gesture. His weapons were spent, his body injured. He had nothing left but his will to protect the boy. "Run!" he whispered to Matthias. "Use your blood on that symbol. I'll hold him as long as I can." "No," Matthias replied, his voice suddenly steady. "I won't leave you." He stepped out from behind Elias, facing Lazarus directly. "If I go with you willingly, will you heal him and let him go?" The revenant's lipless mouth curved in a semblance of a smile. "Such nobility in one so young. Your father would be proud." He extended his withered hand. "Yes, child, I will spare your hunter if you come to me now." Elias grabbed Matthias's shoulder. "Don't trust him. Creatures like him don't keep their word." But Matthias gently removed Elias's hand. "I have to try," he said. "I can't watch you die for me." He stepped toward Lazarus, his small figure silhouetted against the Revenant's taller form. "Good," Lazarus purred. "You begin to understand what you are. Not human, not bound by human weakness." He reached for the boy. In that moment, the air in the sanctuary changed. A current of energy rippled through the chamber, raising the hairs on Elias's arms. The temperature plummeted, their breath suddenly visible in clouds of vapor. "Step away from my son." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonant with power and unmistakably familiar. Sebastian Blackwood materialized between Lazarus and Matthias, his form translucent at first, but rapidly solidifying. He was changed from when they had last seen him, his elegant clothes replaced by a simple black tunic, his aristocratic features sharper, more predatory. An aura of darkness clung to him like a second skin. "Impossible," Lazarus hissed, genuine fear in his burning eyes for the first time. "Voss destroyed you. I saw it." "You saw what I wanted you to see, old teacher." Sebastian's voice was cold, implacable. "Did you think I survived 8 centuries without learning how to cheat death?" Matthias stared at his father, joy and uncertainty warring on his face. "Father, is it really you?" Sebastian's expression softened as he looked at his son, though his eyes remained fixed on Lazarus. "Yes, Matthias, I'm here as I promised I would be." "This changes nothing," Lazarus snarled, regaining his composure. "You are still outmatched, Blackwood. The Conclave hunts your son. Voss and his cohort will track you to the ends of the earth, and I—" He drew himself up, power gathering around him like a storm cloud. "I am still your better in every way." "Perhaps," Sebastian acknowledged. "But you made one crucial mistake, Lazarus." "And what is that?" Sebastian smiled, revealing fangs that seemed longer, sharper than before. "You followed us to the one place where the veil between worlds is thinnest, where the boundary between life and death blurs." He raised his hands and the sanctuary trembled. The shattered fragments of the crystal sphere rose from the floor, suspended in mid-air, each shard beginning to glow with an unearthly light. "What are you doing?" Lazarus demanded, alarm replacing confidence in his ancient voice. "What ritual is this?" Instead of answering, Sebastian turned to look at Elias. "Hunter," he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of command. "Take Matthias and place your hands on the wall symbol. Both of you, with blood freely given." Elias hesitated, torn between distrust of the vampire and the clear danger Lazarus presented. "Please," Sebastian added, and there was something in his voice, a father's desperation, that decided Elias. He grabbed Matthias's hand and pulled him toward the hidden symbol on the wall. Lazarus, sensing their intention, lunged forward with a howl of rage, but Sebastian intercepted him. The two ancient vampires collided with supernatural force, the impact shaking dust from the ceiling. "Now!" Sebastian shouted as he grappled with Lazarus, the two of them moving almost too quickly for human eyes to follow. Elias pressed his injured wrist to the stone raven, his broken bones sending spikes of agony up his arm as blood welled from a cut reopened in the struggle. Matthias placed his still-bleeding palm beside Elias's, their blood mingling on the cold stone. The symbol blazed to life, not with golden light this time, but with a deep, pulsing crimson. The wall before them shimmered and became transparent, revealing a tunnel beyond that glowed with the same red luminescence. Behind them, Sebastian and Lazarus fought with primal ferocity, their human semblances falling away to reveal the monstrous nature beneath, elongated limbs, distorted features, eyes burning with inhuman power. "Go through!" Sebastian commanded, his voice barely recognizable now. "The path will lead you to safety." "What about you?" Matthias cried, resisting Elias's attempt to pull him into the tunnel. Sebastian momentarily gained the upper hand, pinning Lazarus against the far wall. He looked at his son, and for an instant his features returned to their human appearance. "I will find you," he promised, "but first I must end this, once and for all." The sanctuary began to shake violently, stones cracking, a deep rumbling emanating from beneath their feet. The floating crystal shards spun faster, their light intensifying to a blinding brilliance. "He's collapsing the sanctuary," Elias realized aloud, "with himself and Lazarus inside it." He scooped up Matthias, ignoring the boy's protests and his own injuries, and plunged into the blood-red tunnel. The last thing they heard as the wall sealed behind them was Sebastian Blackwood's voice, raised in an incantation in no human language, and Lazarus's scream of primal terror. The tunnel enveloped them in crimson light, pulling them forward with inexorable force. Matthias clung to Elias, his face buried against the hunter's shoulder, his small body trembling with silent sobs. "He's gone," the boy whispered. "I can feel it. He's really gone this time." Elias held him tighter, unable to offer false comfort. The sacrifice they had just witnessed had been real and final. But as the tunnel carried them toward whatever sanctuary Sebastian had prepared, a single thought troubled Elias's mind. What had the vampire meant when he said the boundary between life and death blurred in that place? And why had Sebastian's last look at his son seemed not like farewell, but like a promise? The blood-red tunnel wrapped around them like a living thing, pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats as it carried them forward. Elias clutched Matthias tightly, the boy's tears dampening his coat, both of them silent with the weight of Sebastian's sacrifice. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting beneath the foundations of Ravenwood until suddenly it opened into a circular chamber, much like the sanctuary they had fled, but untouched by violence. As they stepped onto solid ground, the tunnel entrance sealed behind them, the crimson light fading to reveal their new surroundings. Unlike the austere sanctuary beneath the clock tower, this chamber bore signs of careful preparation. A small hearth with wood already stacked, shelves of provisions, books and maps, 2 beds, not one. "He planned for both of us," Elias murmured, setting Matthias down gently. The realization sent a complicated wave of emotions through him. Sebastian Blackwood, vampire lord, had anticipated that his son might be accompanied by a hunter and had made provisions accordingly. Matthias moved slowly around the chamber, trailing his fingers over the furniture, the books, stopping finally before a small wooden chest at the foot of one of the beds. "This has my name on it," he said quietly. Elias approached, wincing at the pain in his ribs and wrist. Indeed, carved into the lid in elegant script was Matthias Blackwood. "Should I open it?" the boy asked, looking up at Elias with uncertainty clouding his dark eyes. Elias nodded. "Your father left it for you." With careful movements, Matthias lifted the lid. Inside lay several items: a leather-bound journal, a small silver key, a velvet pouch, and an envelope sealed with black wax, bearing the imprint of a raven. Matthias picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. "It's addressed to both of us," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Elias knelt beside him, curiosity overriding caution. "Open it," he encouraged. The boy broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of parchment covered in flowing script. He began to read aloud. "Matthias, my son, and Elias Thornfield, hunter. If you are reading this, then my contingencies have proven necessary. The sanctuary beneath the clock tower has been compromised, and I have likely sacrificed myself to ensure your escape. Do not mourn for me. What I have done willingly, for there is no price too great for a father to pay for his child's safety. Matthias, in the journal you will find the true history of your birth, your nature, and the prophecy that has made you a target of the conclave. Read it when you are ready. Not all truths are meant to be shouldered by one so young, but circumstances have forced my hand. Thornfield, I have studied your career with interest over the years. Your determination, your skill, but most importantly, your capacity for mercy when others of your calling would show none. These qualities led me to hope that if fate threw you and my son together, you might see beyond your prejudices. It appears my hope was not misplaced. The sanctuary you now occupy lies beneath the abandoned Blackwood hunting lodge in the Raven Shadow Forest, 20 miles north of the city. You will be safe here for a time, but not indefinitely. The Conclave's reach is long. In 3 days' time, at the stroke of midnight, go to the stone circle at the heart of the forest. Bring the contents of the velvet pouch. A loyal ally of mine will meet you there and guide you to a ship bound for distant shores, where Matthias may grow into his power beyond the Conclave's influence. The silver key opens a compartment in the north wall of this chamber, where you will find weapons suited to your calling, Thornfield, including several of my own design that may surprise you. One last thing. The Book of Ascension that Voss spoke of is real, but the Conclave possesses only fragments of its prophecy. The complete text does not portend the salvation or destruction of vampire kind, but rather speaks of a balance restored, a new covenant between the living and the undead, with a bridge between worlds to unite them. That bridge is Matthias. Guard him well, Hunter, not for my sake, but for his own, and perhaps for the future of both our kinds. Until we meet again, for I assure you, even death is not necessarily the end for one such as I, Sebastian Blackwood. Silence fell as Matthias finished reading. Elias stared at the letter, his mind racing with implications. Until we meet again. What could that mean? Was it merely a figure of speech, or had Sebastian indeed found some way to cheat true death, as he had implied during his confrontation with Lazarus? Matthias carefully set the letter down and opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with the same elegant handwriting. "There are drawings," he said, showing Elias illustrations of arcane symbols, anatomical sketches comparing human and vampire physiologies, and what appeared to be a family tree tracing back centuries. "Your father was very thorough," Elias observed, moving to examine the north wall where Sebastian had indicated a hidden compartment would be. He found a small keyhole, cleverly disguised as a knot in the wood paneling. "He always said knowledge was power," Matthias replied absently, already absorbed in reading the journal's first pages. "That's why he made me study so hard, even when I wanted to play instead." Elias inserted the silver key into the hidden lock and turned it. A section of the wall slid smoothly aside, revealing an alcove that made the hunter's eyes widen with professional appreciation. Within lay an arsenal that would have been the envy of any hunter. Crossbows of intricate design, bolts tipped with silver and other stranger metals, daggers with runes etched into their blades, vials of liquids in various colors, and most surprisingly, several firearms modified with attachments Elias couldn't immediately identify. "Your father certainly knew how to prepare for a fight," he murmured, lifting one of the crossbows. It was lighter than his own, yet the mechanism felt more robust. A note attached to it read simply, "Enhanced range, doubled impact. The bolts are hollow, designed to deliver alchemical compounds upon contact." As Elias examined the weapons cache, Matthias grew increasingly quiet, his face growing paler as he read deeper into his father's journal. Finally, the boy closed the book with trembling hands. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "About what I am? What I'm supposed to become?" Elias set down the crossbow and returned to Matthias's side. "I only know what we heard from Voss and your father, about the prophecy." Matthias looked up at him, his dark eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I'm the first successful Dhampir in over 1,000 years. Father spent centuries researching, experimenting." His voice caught. "My mother was from a bloodline he'd been tracking for generations. She had special qualities. Her blood could withstand sunlight. It could heal vampires of certain weaknesses." "And she agreed to bear you?" Elias asked gently. Matthias nodded. "According to this, she volunteered. She was a scholar who studied the occult. She knew what father was, and she wanted to be part of creating something new." His small face crumpled slightly. "But she died when I was born. The birth was too much for a human body to withstand." Elias placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Matthias. The conclave wants me because they think I can make them immune to sunlight and blessed objects," Matthias continued. "But Father says that's not what the prophecy really means. He says I'm supposed to bring peace somehow, not just make vampires stronger." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know how to do that. I don't even know what I am, not really." "Perhaps that's something you'll discover as you grow," Elias suggested. "For now, we need to focus on keeping you safe until we can meet this ally of your father's." He stood and moved to examine the provisions Sebastian had left them. There was food suitable for a human child: bread, dried fruit, smoked meat, and a small wooden box that, when opened, revealed several vials of dark liquid that Elias recognized as blood. For Matthias, he realized. The dampier part of the boy would need it, especially after using his abilities. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. Elias's injuries began to heal, aided by a salve he found among Sebastian's supplies. Matthias alternated between periods of childlike curiosity, exploring their sanctuary, and asking endless questions about Elias's life as a hunter, and somber silence as he read more of his father's journal. On the evening of the 3rd day, as they prepared to leave for the stone circle, Matthias finally opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a pendant, a small crystal sphere similar to the one in the clock tower sanctuary, suspended on a silver chain. "It's warm," Matthias said with surprise, holding it in his palm. Elias leaned closer to examine it. Within the crystal, a tiny spark of golden light pulsed like a heartbeat. "It's alive somehow," he observed. "Magic, perhaps." Matthias slipped the chain over his head, tucking the pendant beneath his shirt. "It feels like him," he said quietly. "Like Father." They left the sanctuary as midnight approached, Elias armed with Sebastian's enhanced weapons, Matthias carrying the journal and his father's letter in a small pack. The forest beyond the hunting lodge was ancient, trees towering like sentinels in the darkness, their branches interwoven to block much of the moonlight. "Can you see?" Elias asked, realizing how dark the path was becoming. Matthias nodded. "Better than during the day, actually," he admitted. "Father says in the journal that my eyes will continue to change as I grow. I'll always see better at night." They followed a narrow trail that wound between massive tree trunks, the ground soft with centuries of fallen leaves. Matthias led the way unerringly, as if drawn by some invisible thread. "It's just ahead," he said after they had walked for nearly an hour. "I can feel it." They emerged into a clearing where 7 standing stones formed a perfect circle, each twice the height of a man and covered in carvings too weathered to decipher. At the center stood a flat altar stone, its surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "No one's here," Elias observed, checking the shadows between the trees with practiced caution. "We're early," Matthias replied, moving to touch one of the standing stones. "The moon isn't at its zenith yet." They waited in silence, the forest around them eerily quiet, as if the wildlife knew to avoid this ancient place. When the moon finally reached its highest point, bathing the circle in silver light, Matthias's pendant began to glow beneath his shirt. "Something's happening," he whispered, pulling it out. The tiny spark within had grown brighter, its pulsing more rapid. A mist began to form at the edge of the clearing, coalescing into a hooded figure that approached with careful steps. Elias raised his crossbow instinctively. "Peace, hunter," came a woman's voice from beneath the hood. "I come as friend, not foe." She lowered her hood, revealing a face of startling beauty, pale skin, high cheekbones, and eyes of such a deep blue they appeared almost violet. She was clearly vampire, yet there was an otherworldly quality to her that set her apart from others of her kind that Elias had encountered. "You're the ally my father mentioned," Matthias said, stepping forward before Elias could stop him. The woman inclined her head. I am Lilith, young Matthias. I have known your father for a very long time. Her gaze shifted to Elias. And you must be Thornfield, the hunter with compassion. Sebastian chose well. How do we know we can trust you? Elias demanded, not lowering his weapon. Lilith smiled, revealing small, delicate fangs. You don't, but the pendant will. She gestured to the crystal, now glowing brightly against Matthias's chest. Sebastian bound a fragment of his essence to it before his final battle with Lazarus. It recognizes friend from foe. As if responding to her words, the pendant's glow intensified, casting golden light across the stone circle. Where are you taking us? Matthias asked. To the far eastern shores, Lilith replied, beyond the reach of the conclave, to a place where others like you, rare though they are, have found sanctuary. She extended her hand. But we must hurry. The ship waits, and we are not the only ones who know of this meeting. As if summoned by her warning, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable presence of the undead. Elias spun, crossbow raised, as figures emerged from the forest on all sides, vampires in the black attire of the conclave's enforcers. The boy comes with us, announced their leader, a gaunt vampire with a face like a bird of prey. By order of Lord Voss and the vampire conclave. Voss survived, Elias muttered. Of course he did. Lilith moved to stand beside Matthias and Elias, her posture shifting to one of battle readiness. The boy is under my protection, she called, and I do not recognize the conclave's authority here. This place is older than your petty council, sanctified by powers you have forgotten. The leader laughed. Your reputation precedes you, Lady Lilith, but even you cannot stand against all of us. He gestured, and the vampires began to close in, at least a dozen of them moving with predatory grace. Get behind me, Elias ordered Matthias, raising Sebastian's enhanced crossbow. But Matthias didn't move. Instead, he reached up to grasp the pendant at his chest, his small face set with determination. No, he said, I won't run anymore. The crystal flared with sudden blinding light as Matthias raised it above his head. From within its depths came a sound like distant thunder, and the air in the stone circle began to shimmer with golden energy. What's happening? Elias asked, looking to Lilith. Her violet eyes were wide with wonder. Sebastian's final gift, she whispered. He didn't just bind a fragment of his essence to the pendant, he bound all of it. The advancing vampires faltered as the shimmering air took shape, coalescing into a towering figure of golden light that stood protectively over Matthias. Though composed entirely of radiance, its features were unmistakable. Sebastian Blackwood, transformed, but undeniably present. Father, Matthias breathed, tears streaming down his face. The luminous figure inclined its head in acknowledgement before turning toward the conclave's enforcers. When it spoke, the voice was Sebastian's, but layered with harmonics that vibrated the very stones beneath their feet. My son is not your weapon, it declared. He is not your salvation or your destruction. He is himself, and he will choose his own path. The leader of the enforcers recovered his composure, his face twisting with hatred. Whatever magic this is, it changes nothing. The boy comes with us, by Voss's command. Voss, the golden apparition said, contempt evident in its tone, tell your master that the old ways are returning. Tell him that the Book of Ascension speaks not of domination, but of balance. It extended a hand, and the standing stones began to glow with the same golden light. Tell him that the bridge between worlds has awakened, and the conclave's days of tyranny are numbered. With those words, the apparition clapped its hands together, sending a shockwave of golden energy outward. The conclave vampires were thrown back, several disintegrating instantly into ash, others fleeing in terror as their undead flesh smoked and burned. In the sudden silence that followed, the glowing figure turned back to Matthias. It knelt before the boy, bringing its radiant face level with his. I'm sorry I had to leave you, Sebastian's voice said gently, but I will always be with you, in this form, bound to the pendant, not fully alive, but not truly gone. "You knew," Matthias said through his tears. "You planned this all along." The apparition nodded. "I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but I planned for every contingency." Its gaze shifted to Elias. "Take care of him, Hunter. Guide him. He will need both human compassion and vampire strength to fulfill his destiny." "I will," Elias promised, surprised by how readily the vow came to his lips. Somewhere in the chaos of the past few days, his mission had transformed completely. No longer did he hunt vampires blindly. Now he protected a bridge between worlds. Lilith stepped forward. "The ship awaits, and dawn approaches. We must go." Sebastian's luminous form nodded once more before dissolving back into the pendant, which returned to its former state, a crystal with a small, pulsing light at its center. Matthias clutched it tightly, a mix of sorrow and wonder on his face. "He's still here," the boy whispered. "I can feel him." "And he always will be," Lilith assured him. "Now come. A new life awaits you both." As they left the stone circle, heading toward the eastern shore, where their ship to distant lands would soon depart, Matthias slipped his hand into Elias's. The hunter looked down at the boy, this impossible child of two worlds, with power enough to change the course of both human and vampire destiny, and felt a surge of protectiveness, unlike anything he had known in his 15 years of hunting. "Do you think we'll ever come back to Ravenwood?" Matthias asked quietly. Elias gazed up at the moon hanging low over the ancient forest. "Someday," he replied, "when you're ready, when both worlds are ready for what you represent." The pendant glowed warmly against Matthias's chest, as if in agreement. And somewhere beyond the veil between life and death, Sebastian Blackwood watched over his son and the hunter who had become his unlikely guardian as they walked toward a dawn that, for the first time in centuries, promised not darkness, but light.